Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here tonight. We just finished up the 30 for 30 on Ric Flair, Nature Boy, getting the exposure right there on ESPN. I can honestly tell you that I thought this was pretty freaking cool. I will say that I don't think that this is better than the WWE documentary that they came out with, back in 2009, I'll guess off the top of my head. Ric Flair had one hell of a career. And for ESPN to come in and try and do a story on him and talk about his life in an hour and a half, I'm sure was a really hard task to try to cover. I thought this was really, really good, though. I honestly can tell you that ESPN got little snippets of interviews from just about every major player in the game. We saw Triple H, we saw Shawn Michaels, we saw Snoop Dogg, The Undertaker, Tony Schiavone, Sting. They talked to just about everybody. There were things that were covered that honestly were covered pretty fast, and sort of. There were some things like his feud with Harley Race that I believed should have got a little bit more time. But I did like the story that almost each segment told during the 30 for 30. I thought that basically when they were talking about, Ric Flair coming up, they talked about the fact that he was adopted, and he lived a normal life. He didn't, live, bizarrely. But I thought it was pretty cool that later on in his life, that when he had made it in the business, I guess you can say, and he bought his first $2 million house. He had his mom and his dad come over, and he really wanted to show over his house and show his parents that he'd really made it in the world. And it wasn't that they were disgusted, but they just looked around in disappointment of, who really needs all of this. He really grew out of the surroundings that he sort of grew up in. And that's sort of weird. And there was always this sort of, looming sort of deal of Ric Flair versus alcoholism and Ric Flair versus depression. Talking about the fact of, Ric Flair slept with 10,000 women. And even if he wasn't going to be spending the night with the hottest chick in the bar, Ric Flair, wanted to hang out with the boys. He didn't really want to be left alone. He was always sort of looking for some sort of attention from somebody. And there was even, I think Road Warrior Animal said it, is, they're talking about how Flair would come out on the plane wearing nothing but his robe. And he sort of pointed to, he wondered if maybe his parents didn't pay enough attention to him as he was growing up. Regardless, is that when it got down to wrestling, Ric Flair was always one of the best wrestlers of all time. They told a few stories. They talked about him feuding with Dusty Rhodes, winning his first world championship. They talked about feuding with Sting. They talked about Ricky Steamboat being one of the best in-ring competitors that Flair ever was able to match up against. I guess you can say the matchup that never happened at WrestleMania 8, Hogan versus Flair. Flair and Hogan being two big rivals. A lot of people thinking that, Hogan was the big star of the WWF. Flair was the biggest star of the WCW. Why didn't it pay off? Why did they have to wait until 1995? And then I guess you can say Flair versus Michaels at WrestleMania 24. But even that really didn't get the attention that you would think one of the biggest matches of Ric Flair's career got. They even went into the TNA years, where they showed a lot more clips showing Lethal Lottery with James Storm, getting a lot of, I guess you can say mainstream publicity here on ESPN, beating up Ric Flair inside of the cage. This was really good. Really, really fun stuff. The story that they told with Dusty were two guys that were friends, but that were always in competition with each other, always wanting to be the biggest and the best. The story that they told with Sting was being the guy who was able to get somebody over, explaining to what selling was, explaining what it means to get somebody over, and have them reach, after their match, being bigger than they were before they got in the ring with you. Talking about Hogan, it was talking about who was the biggest, who was the best, biggest star in the world of wrestling. Both of them pointed, honestly, at the other one. Flair saying that definitely Hogan was the best sports entertainer of all time. He put more dollars in Vince's pocket. He put more butts in the seats. He got more national attention. Hogan says that Flair wrestled 1,000 Broadways in his career and he never wrestled one. Flair is a true wrestler. He will always have the better wrestling matches, and Hogan says that he's just the entertainment guy. And then basically the story with Michaels was just the career winding down and just getting to the end and calling it quits. They interviewed Shawn. Shawn basically says that he understands that wrestling is in his blood and doesn't feel slighted or cheated of anything by Flair going and wrestling in TNA after, saying that their career was over. Shawn has always held to his guns, saying that, when he retired at WrestleMania 26, that he was never going to wrestle again, and that's a bond that he made with Undertaker, and he doesn't want to break that. I keep thinking about how really good this was. I liked it. How they talked about, how Flair kept going. And they showed him, in 95. They showed him in 96. Then they showed him in 97. He was never the guy in WCW because of the fact that, Hulk Hogan and the NWO was there. They had the feud with Eric Bischoff, which was real on screen and in the business room, I guess you can say. I liked the story that they were telling of, basically Flair, the family man. I never knew about his first wife. I honestly thought that Beth was the only wife that he ever had. I didn't know that he had got divorced. And Beth is only the mom of Reed and Ashley. Ashley, who is Charlotte. That's hard to say and get used to. The in-depths they went to talking about Reed and what happened to Reed and the very, very strict truth that Triple H had to say about Reed. I don't know if Triple H was thinking about signing Reed, but he had to lay out a story of basically bringing Reed in and giving him a drug test. And him breaking the news of the drug test to Ric Flair. And Ric Flair making excuses for Reed, basically saying that there was no way that this was true. And Triple H saying that he was going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he respects who Rick is, and he's going to test him again. And Triple H blatantly said, I told him that I was going to test him again. Gave him time, and it still came up dirty. Triple H wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt to get clean. It sounds like to sign him and bring him into WWE. Instead, Rick found out that Reed died, from an overdose of black tar heroin, and from that, it spawned Ashley to find out who she was. And that's the best way that Triple H said it, by picking up Reed's dream to become a professional wrestler, basically going to the Performance Center, getting trained, going through NXT, and in my mind, being the best women's wrestler there is in the world today. Charlotte, since going to SmackDown, has not gotten the push or the rub, I guess you can say, since being there that she did on Raw. Maybe she's sort of paying back for the long run that she did have with the championship, and the battles that went with, battling against Sasha and things like that. But I think that she is the best women's wrestler there is today. And, she says that if what happened to Reed didn't happen, she would have never found her place in NXT to find out how good of a wrestler she could be. I'm hoping that this could spawn into ESPN and 30 for 30 doing more documentaries on wrestling. I know that the ESPN E60 sort of mini documentary on Scott Hall got a good rub. That was a few years ago. I would love to see one on Hulk Hogan. I would love to see one on the glory years of the 80s in professional wrestling. I would love to see one on Vince McMahon. And I think those are the three things that all could happen if wrestling fans all tuned in and checked out the Nature Boy, 30 for 30, Ric Flair.